Alright, so we've all seen videos about beginner gym mistakes, right? Pretty sure I've made one of those videos before. But today I want to go through a few mistakes that might not be quite so obvious, but are certainly just as common. In fact, I've witnessed people with many years of training experience still falling foul of a lot of these. Now, there is just one major caveat that I want to highlight. I'm going to describe some muscle building mistakes, but they're only actually mistakes if the person training is training with the sole aim of building muscle. It is a possibility that some people knowingly make these mistakes, but do so because they just happen to enjoy training a certain way, and obviously that is fine. I think most of us try and strike a balance between like what's effective and what's enjoyable, because it takes so long to build a physique that although you don't have to love every workout, you certainly have to not hate every workout. All right, let's do it. Okay, the first one is allocating volume poorly, or just to say it simply, training some muscles too much and some too little. Now, this is mainly due to something that I like to call false symmetries, or maybe false parallels is a better term. That's when you try and draw parallels between body parts or muscles or movements that actually aren't really there. And this happens in quite a lot of different instances. For example, let's say you want to train twice a week. You might think an upper-lower split is best. Now, on a very basic level, what you've done there is you've drawn a line at the waist and said, we've got an upper body and a lower body, therefore these two halves are roughly equal and they can have a day each. But really that's kind of like saying that you've got a 50-50 chance of winning the lottery because you either do or you don't. The logic ain't really there. Another example might be thinking, for every set of biceps I do, I should do a set of triceps, or even for every horizontal press, I should do a vertical press, because you think one works chest, one works shoulders, therefore I should work my chest and shoulders equally. I wish it was that simple, because giving advice would be a lot easier, but it's just not, I'm afraid. To actually get somewhere close to a balanced routine, you need to look at the individual actions of each muscle, i.e. what movement they are responsible for. And then you can see things like how involved your front deltoids are in a lot of your chest movements, and you might come to the conclusion that maybe you shouldn't be matching every chest press with a shoulder press, but instead focusing a bit more on abduction, i.e. side raises rather than arm flexion, front raises. The bottom line is your back's not your front, your quads aren't your hamstrings, and your arm isn't your leg. I don't know if that's a news flash for anyone, but your arm's not your leg. There you go. Insightful. Number 2 is not resting for long enough in between sets. Now again, all of these are pretty understandable, which is why they're so common. People want to feel like they've had a good workout, and that's part of the reason why so many people make the transition from straight up hypertrophy training to things like CrossFit. But of course, we're talking purely in the context of building muscle here. And in that context, there isn't really any such thing as resting for too long, whereas not resting for long enough can really impact your gains. How long you need to rest for is partly affected by your general fitness levels, but part of it is independent of that also. Let's say your program has you doing 4 sets of 10. If it's your first exercise of the day for that particular muscle, then you should be able to get fairly close to hitting that 4x10 with the same weight without your sets being too easy. Maybe you'll be able to do 10, 10, 9, 8, or even 10, 9, 9, 7. That's fine, it's there or thereabouts. But if you start to fall off a cliff after your first or second set, then one of two things is happening. Either you're not resting for long enough, or you're generally not rested well enough, / you're under recovered, and in that case you should probably just go home, to be honest. If you're somebody who adjusts the weights to enable yourself to always hit the rep target, then you should be able to get through your 4 sets of 10 without reducing it massively. All right, I just want to jump in here and let you know that this video is sponsored by me. I'm just promoting my own stuff, that's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, the app that we've been working on for the past forever is almost ready for full release. It's actually with some testers as we speak. Don't know why I'm pointing over there. They're definitely not over there. Anyway, I'll go into more detail about the functionality of it at a later date, but for now I'll just tell you it's not just going to be an app with all these built-in preloaded program templates. It's taken so long because we've been teaching it to write programs from scratch whilst taking into account all of the things that I talk about in this video and all of my videos really. So not only will it generate a program, but you'll then see that program adapt over time as the app analyzes your performance applies a progression scheme and navigates you through plateaus. When we're a bit closer, as I say, I will go into some more detail, but for now, I don't want to interrupt this video too much. If you want to sign up to our mailing list for updates on release, and then in future, things like new features, etc., as and when they are being developed, then you can do so through the link in the description. We won't share your email address with anyone, and we won't send you any spam, ever. Number 3 is doing too many sets for the same muscle in the same workout. This is something that I touched on in a recent video, so I'm not going to elaborate too much. To oversimplify, a good upper limit of sets per muscle per workout is about 10. So this might look like 5 sets of incline bench press and then 5 sets of cable flies. And after that, the rest of your workout will be focusing on different muscles. This is a massive generalization because the limit depends on the individual and also on the nature of those 10 sets. So it's not a hard line in the sand, but I think a good recommendation for most people would be 5 sets of a compound movement and 5 sets of an isolation movement for a single muscle in one workout. That's a loose maximum, not a minimum. Once you get beyond that, the chances that you're wasting your time and energy just increases with every set. Of course, if you follow this principle, you naturally end up with training splits and programs that have you hitting a minimum of 2, more likely 3, and potentially 4 muscles each workout. Not with a full 10 sets each, of course. Number 4 is poor exercise selection. Again, this probably just comes from a lack of knowledge on biomechanics, really, and let me just clarify, I'm really not an expert in that, and nor do you need to be. The amount of reading that you need to do to become competently knowledgeable enough just to make good exercise choices, it really isn't that much. There are a few basic points that you need to look at when you're choosing exercises. First and foremost, the muscle that you're training should be the limiting factor, which means that if you were to train to failure, it's that muscle that would fail first. Now, usually this is quite straightforward to get right, but there's no blanket exercise choices that apply to everyone because aside from the exercise, this can also be affected by the relative strength of your different muscles. Second, there's the resistance curve of the exercise. So something like a tricep kickback has an extreme resistance curve because all of the work is at one end of the rep. Now, if you do really want to include exercises with very skewed resistance curves like this, then you should probably try and balance them out with ones that are skewed the other way. Now, in an ideal world, you would just choose exercises that challenge the muscle through the entire range of motion, or ones that are slightly skewed towards the middle, where you have the best overlap between sarcomeres for generating force, but that's not always possible. If you want to go a bit further down that rabbit hole, then you can look for exercises that best match the strength curve with the resistance curve, but that could be venturing into overkill territory for most recreational lifters. Third, and probably the most basic, you want exercises that have a concentric and eccentric component. So without wanting to overcomplicate things, you have active and passive components in your muscle fibers. The active components experience mechanical tension during concentric lifting phases, whilst passive components experience it more when resisting a weight and stretching during the eccentric phase. Now, they both cause muscle fibers to grow, but in slightly different ways, and if you want to maximize growth, you want both. So one of the many reasons I prefer Romanian deadlifts over conventional is due to this eccentric phase. I'm sorry if you find that problematic. Now, there are other more nuanced factors, but if you can think about these, you're probably like 95% of the way there. I have done some videos on my favorite exercise choices, but I might also do some on exercises that I don't like. Number 5 is training to failure too much. So to summarize, it's not really the training to failure itself that's a bad thing. Most studies indicate that it's about the same or not much better or not much worse than training near to failure. The problem with it is really the potential impact it can have on the rest of your training. So there is a short-term cost in that it will affect your performance for the rest of the workout, and you can partly get around this by sticking to that per session, per muscle set limit that we talked about earlier, but even then you would want to save your failure sets until last. That's why I usually say, if you want to go to failure, do it on the final set of the exercise. If you do it on the first, then you're probably going to be carrying over too much fatigue to your subsequent sets, and your overall work capacity will be lower than if you paced yourself. There's also a more medium-term cost in that hitting failure often will increase your recovery cost between workouts. In most cases, this is still going to be recoverable for most people, so you're probably not in danger of overtraining. That being said, if you use a full body program, sometimes you might be hitting the same muscle on consecutive days. And so if you do incur such a high recovery cost from one day that it impacts your performance the next day, well, that really is by definition overtraining or under recovering. They're two sides of the same coin. As it happens, some of the worst offenders of this mistake are probably people on performance enhancing drugs, but for them, you have to understand that their capacity to recover is hugely boosted, so they're likely to get away with it more. Still, they didn't get big because of it, but rather in spite of it. Alright, thanks for watching. I think that's all the mistakes I've got off the top of my head anyway, but please do feel free to add your own in the comments. I would really be interested to hear any of the less obvious ones in particular. Aside from that, like my video if you want, subscribe to my channel if you want, see you in the next video if you want, everything's if you want. See you later, if you want.
Jordy Lenny is my hero!